was discussed that there were perhaps some different perspectives that various stakeholders had in the conversation. The AG's office was charged with putting together the report, which they did. We are going to hear this afternoon from the logging community, or at least representatives of the logging community, on their thoughts on that report. So we've asked Dana Duran to join us. He's here in the committee room, and I see Sam is also joining us remotely from the woods, I imagine. So welcome to both of you. And we've got until about 3:30. So I don't know how much material you've got, but if you, we'll let you present it, and then we'll see what questions you might have afterwards.
Sounds great. And I did provide written testimony, so you should have all have that at this point. But I'll run through that. So Representative Durfee, Representative Supernaut, members of the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resilience, and Forestry. My name is Dana Duran. I'm the Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. We are an educational association that represents timber harvesting and hauling contractors both here in Maine, but also in New Hampshire and the state of Maine. I'm not going to run down through our background. Happy to do that, but I'll try to skip over some of my written testimony. So during the previous legislative session, the PLC supported H614, which came through this committee, that ultimately recommended that the Attorney General work with stakeholders to write the report that was presented last week. Timber harvesters are not generally in favor of more government regulation. However, we believe then and still today that the legislation which was supported by this committee last year was an important step to professionalize the industry in Vermont, protect landowners, and ensure that the industry moves forward without a black eye that has festered here in the state of Vermont for decades. So this past summer and fall, Sam Lincoln, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, from Lincoln Farm Timber Harvesting, myself and other stakeholders worked with Megan Harris, the Assistant Attorney General, to review and recommend the 4 pillars of the final report, which were required in the legislation that passed last session. We provided responses to questions, took Ms. Harris to visit an active timber harvest, participated in a single stakeholder discussion in the fall, and also reviewed the draft report in advance of sending it to this committee. However, the final report that was provided to this committee was at no time reviewed by the group in a joint setting, nor was it released with any type of majority consensus. Thus, it is a report issued by the AGO, but it doesn't have noted consensus or support from the stakeholders jointly. It was our goal to be sure that the final report was a thorough dissection of the issues pertaining to timber trespass and timber theft in Vermont, but provided solid recommendations that could be implemented or enacted to improve the situation in the state. We're thankful to Ms. Harris for her time and attention to the process, the issues, and the narration of the final report. Ms. Harris was very professional from start to finish and really tried to understand the situation as well as the issues that needed to be addressed to make forward progress. Ms. Harris provided a draft of the final report for me to review on January 2nd, 2025. The opinions and recommendations that we provided in writing to Ms. Harris on January 12th, 2025 still hold true, and I think it's important for this committee to understand our perspective on the final report as well as the comments that we provided to Ms. Harris, which unfortunately were not included in the final production. So in the introduction, the report succinctly lays out the 4 primary purposes for the study committee and the report back. However, we don't feel that the report provided equal weight to each of the 4 pillars. There was significant time and attention given to the landscape of complaints, the levels of enforcement, and the ultimate outcomes, which was a summary of the issues pillar number 1. However, the other 3 pillars, other states, policy recommendations, and property seizures are quite brief and relatively inconclusive. As a result, we don't feel that the report provided to this committee nor the agencies within the executive branch actually provides a roadmap to move forward with changes. Instead, the recommendations section essentially calls for a 2-year pause to see what takes place as a result of the implementation of H614, an education and awareness campaign taken on by the industry, enforcement ideas with no plan nor dedication of resources, and a hope that awareness by stakeholders will lead to greater intake. While these recommendations could bear fruit, most are based upon a, quote, possibility and lack any type of ownership, direction, or mapping. In addition, we also believe that the report lacks the following specificity. 1, conclusions for each section or statutory questions for further inquiry. 2, the statute specifies, quote, a summary of mechanisms or alternatives utilized in other states to effectively enforce or prevent timber theft or similar crimes. The only comparative inquiry that was provided in the report was from Maine. And this information was offered by our organization as it was also included in our testimony on H614 last session. 3, so our summary is, or question is, was other comparative research done and are there other examples to examine from other states? 3, there are no recommendations other than waiting 2 years and a broad brush approach to education and or case intake. It's not clear why harvest notification and or trip tickets were not included or any other program, policy changes, staffing, or any mention of budget estimates to solve the problem. 4, there were no recommendations from government agency stakeholders, including FPR, the state police, the assistant attorney generals, or assistant state attorneys, other than a reference to FPR issuing citations. Without some tangible input and recommendations from those statutorily charged with protecting forests and the public, this report essentially lacks traction to advance legislation or create meaningful change. In the end, our organization feels strongly that to improve the image of the industry in Vermont, to gain the trust of landowners, that logging contractors are stewards and not thieves, a coordinated and thoughtful approach to the issue of timber theft and trespass is vital. While this report was a good starting point, it does not provide the depth nor specificity to move forward expecting results. We would ask this committee to think seriously about what is necessary to move forward and take our opinions and recommendations to heart. Thanks for the opportunity to speak before you today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. If the committee has questions that you wanted to direct to Dana, we can do that. We also, I don't know whether Sam, if we were going to say, if you had comments as well, Sam, but looking to the committee first to see if there's any immediate thoughts or questions. Representative O'Brien.
Go ahead.
Representative O'Brien.
All right. Dane, I just, in hindsight now, looking back, because we went through this process, we heard a lot of testimony, right? Just what would have you done differently? I mean, it's gone right to something, and it seemed like, was it on the attorney generals and state's attorney's side where they had misgivings about moving forward with this? Because I remember we had versions of the bill that may have been stronger.
Good question, Representative O'Brien. You know, I can't speak on behalf of the Attorney General, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions upon the tack they took or the process. From a process perspective, you know, I thought they did a very good job soliciting input, soliciting feedback. I think that in hindsight, I would have brought the group back together. I would have searched for solutions that all of us could coalesce around. They could have been things that we provided. They could have been recommendations, but we don't know what they are. And again, I mentioned before, there was no consensus. I mean, we provided input on some questions. We did a field visit. We had one stakeholder meeting and we got to look at the draft report individually. So there was no consensus. So that's, I think, a big part that's missing at this point. So that there are some tangible recommendations and that you had multiple stakeholders saying, okay, let's pause for 2 years. Let's see how this law went into effect. But over here, let's go over here and do this, or let's make this recommendation, or this is in statute already. We could do this. So who would take the lead? And I think that's, Sam's going to talk quite a bit about this. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but what's the roadmap to go forward besides pause? You know, there are some recommendations in here, but they don't have any ownership. Who's going to do the work? Who's doing what? We have agencies that are already involved. What are they going to do? Is this an industry problem still, or is this a public problem? So those are the things that I think could have been, I guess, furthered had we had further dialogue, had there been more stakeholder discussions.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, I first of all, full transparency, I did participate in these stakeholder meetings. At least 2 over the summer, one on site, one in the pavilion building. And as a longtime timber harvester, I have held licenses in 4 other states where I've worked: Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. And there are a lot of options that are not necessarily that were put into place in neighboring states. And I've never actually worked in Maine, so that are effective and not onerous for as a timber harvester, that do offer some protections that I share Executive Director Doran's concern that there was no opportunity to discuss or peel back any of these other options around the Northeast that have been in place in some cases for decades, and where they still have very vibrant timber harvesting communities. With that said, again, as someone who reported this bill and advocated for it last session, mostly out of honor in the looking after the landowners who were vulnerable and targeted historically and continually, that came to our committee in good faith, hoping for some support. I feel that we did let them down, and the industry, profession, which I love and depend on for a living, I think we could have done better. So that's more of a comment, but it's still a challenge. This is work that's incomplete. And kicking the can down the road for 2 years is not a solution.
Representative Byrd.
My opinion.
Thank you, Chairman. What is your industry's suggestion? To what and that, yeah, that's my question. What would you recommend that state do?
Good question. I think we've been pretty adamant and consistent last session when we came in to testify in H614 during the stakeholder process. We laid out the fact that there needs to be a potential trip ticket system that's employed, that is required for every load of wood that comes off of a landowner. There is a paper trail that goes from the contractor, landowner, to the mill, so that in the event there is timber theft or timber trespass, you have a paper trail that's already there, that exists. And you could say that the cowboys or those who don't go along with the law are going to skirt that. Well, if the mills know that they can't accept a load of wood without a trip ticket, without origination information about where that wood is coming from and who the landowner is, then they're culpable too, if they don't accept it. So that's number one. We've advocated for an operations notification system, some simple system, so that the state, whether it's FPR or whomever else is going to be in the policing world, knows where harvests are taking place. Again, so that it's a track and trace system. You know exactly where harvests are happening, who's involved. There could be a random inspection. Folks know that. They know that up front. I think that's a secondary piece. From FPR's standpoint, I think there's got to be some education to landowners, to contractors, but it all depends upon resources and then what inevitably is asked of the agency to implement. And it could go far beyond that, but I would say from our perspective, those are the 3 big pieces.
Do you think that could potentially happen through the county foresters in the state, the operations notifications?
I certainly think it could happen. There likely will have to be some type of an enforcement mechanism to do the inspections. I don't think the county foresters, with all that they have on their plates, are going to go out and be able to lay eyes on the ground on every single operation. That might include whether it's IF&W, and we wouldn't want to add responsibility to them either, but there needs to be some type of a ranger position at some point that's involved, where the landowner can, ask questions, they have issues, they can report. There has to be a central conduit, and right now it's like this.
Yeah, it's the other, if the sawmill's already having to do a ticketing system, similar to like, if I want to go and be exempt for tax at Tractor Supply or whatever, or farm, or at a fertilizer distribution place, I have to bring in a form and fill out and give it to them and say I'm exempt, and this is. You'd think maybe the sawmills, when the load comes in, the ticketed lumber or whatever, gets an operations notification at the same time. Saying, okay, this came from this job, this is what's going on, and they just send that on. But whatever, yeah, it's thinking of different possibilities, so those are details that are worked out later, but.
Yep.
I saw your hand, Richard, too, and I'll get to you in a sec. When we had testimony last week, I don't think we delved too much into the question of other states other jurisdictions that might have been consulted, or the time frame that this report was, that the AG was charged with submitting the report, and knowing that we had testimony, separate testimony on a separate report last week that just pointed to how 6 months, the time between June and December isn't very long. And in order to accomplish anything with a group of stakeholders, getting everybody together, can be a challenge. And I wonder if I wonder whether you would like to comment on that, whether having more input from other stakeholders might be and other jurisdictions might be a good first step in moving forward. How much of, so you have a position, perhaps other stakeholders have different positions. In order to actually move forward, how critical would it be to get more, to see what other places are doing, or maybe not?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, I'd like to understand from the Attorney General's office, did they look at other states? I mean, I've read the report. I know it's in the report. I know that's information that we provided to them. I'd like to know, did they consult with other states? Are there other regimes that are out there that potentially could be put in place in Vermont? I mean, Vermont is not Maine and Maine is not Vermont. So Maine might not be the right situation. Maybe there's another state that's similar to Vermont that has a system already. But I think having that baseline information is an important starting point. And then perhaps it is continuing the stakeholder process to move down the road once you have more information.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you. Okay, so timber trespass. Is it two different issues? And I have two questions. Is it two separate issues? The over harvest, I understand when you do a harvest, you have a prescription. If you're in current use, especially, you have a prescription for harvest. Is it to protect against the over harvest of the prescription? And is this also the same as timber theft, where someone crosses property lines?
Good question, Representative. So I think they're not mutually exclusive, but they can also be tied together. So timber trespass generally occurs when you do cross a property line without permission and you harvest outside of a boundary. And generally timber trespass there are two cases. There's knowingly, intentionally, and there's unintentionally. There's a lot of contractors that do it unintentionally because the landowner told them, here's my boundary line. I had it surveyed. This is the point on the earth where it exists. Here are some monuments. And effectively, it turns out not to be the boundary line. They're not doing it knowingly. Then you also have timber trespass where it's knowing. You have someone who has been hired to do a job. They come in, oh, I see an acre over here. There's some hardwood. Hardwood market strong. I'm going to grab that wood. Then that becomes not only timber trespass, but it becomes timber theft. That's one case of timber theft. A second case of timber theft is someone is hired to do a job. They go in and they pay what they promised to pay, what was in the contract. They don't report the wood that they've sold. And even say that I even sold this wood and don't pay you for it. So that's also timber theft.
Okay,
For that. And so there are two different issues, but most of the time they're wrapped together.
understood. Okay, and in my world of dairy farming, the biggest three letters I'm afraid of are DEC. And why has anyone thought of charging DEC with being in charge of this? And because they tend to have teeth.
It's a valid question. I would say all ideas are on the table. You know, but clearly FBR has a role and responsibility. They are the enforcement regulatory. Not on all, but you know, AMPs and et cetera, clear cutting, so
And
They have a-
FBR, I believe, is under ANR.
it is. Along with these.
And along with DEC, who is their enforcement.
Mhm.
They're the pit bulls.
Yeah, all ideas are good ideas.
A situation happened up in a town close to me, and the people they went in and just stole their timber.
Mhm.
A big, 10 acres or 8 acres, whatever it was, and they're never gonna see that marketable.
Mhm.
Their kids won't see it marketable. Maybe their grandkids will.
And all it takes is one rotten apple to spoil the bushel.
So that's the issue, yep, that we're faced here with, Representative O'Brien.
And just to follow up, Richard, the irony being that DEC then sometimes gets involved and says to the landowner, why is this job such a mess? You owe us money because
Yeah.
the water's running where it should be now, right?
Sam, you've been listening in and I hope you have do you have the heat on in your cab there? It's you're sitting still.
I do. You
Okay.
can count on it. I'll
All right.
have a fire going if I have to.
And did you have any, I don't know if you wanted to add anything or if you had anything to say to start with?
I do. I do have testimony prepared. If I should proceed.
Sure, yeah. Why don't you then? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to introduce myself to new members of the committee, for the record, my name is Sam Lincoln. I own and operate a master logger certified mechanized timber harvesting and business in Randolph Center. In addition to my career as a multi-generational farmer and logging contractor, I've also served 4 years as the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation in the Scott administration. And I also currently serve on the board of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. It's nice to see you all. My first testimony in the State House goes back 33 years ago, and actually 20 some years ago, Representative Nelson and I testified on ag issues together quite some time ago. Thank you, Chairman Durfee and the committee for taking testimony on the report. My experience with the issue of the timber trespass spans my role in both the private and public sector. As a logging contractor, I am aware of various situations in which landowners, sometimes my neighbors, have been the victim of unscrupulous operators who betrayed their trust and their property. And this has occasionally resulted in my profession being held in very low regard by members of the public. As an official in the executive branch, I was essentially powerless to effectively respond to citizens that brought forth concerns about timber trespass that had been alleged to have occurred on their property with any resources that might bring them swift investigations, restitution, or justice. As a member of the PLC, I contributed to the development of 614 through working with Representative Mahaley through your committee last session and as a stakeholder. And did so, put that time in as a volunteer and a member of the industry and the community, hopeful in developing effective next steps in reducing the instances of timber trespass and aiding in more predictable and effective prosecution. I was glad to learn, as you may have last week, that not necessarily always happy to find out that there's been arrests, but of anybody, but we were not aware that there have been arrests of people for the crime of timber theft. Some data was generated through the stakeholder study group that was good to know. And I certainly, again, appreciate the efforts of the AGO. But I do have specific comments and questions with the intent to take action to deter and investigate timber trespass violations. The report does note that additional resources are needed to more effectively investigate and prosecute allegations of timber trespass, but there were no estimates for necessary budgets, staffing, or materials to address these constraints that were provided to us as part of the stakeholder group or submitted in the report for us to digest and provide feedback on. And that's one of the things we said last year, was that if agencies need resources, then let us know what that is, and we will stand behind you. We do not ask. I've worked, as I said, for years in a state agency, and I understand the constraints, but we can't get behind that if we don't know what's needed. And if there was also not a budget or concept for a public awareness campaign to better inform landowners, and that was again a next step. So we'd like to know if there's a budget or a plan to implement that. The PLC, as Dana mentioned, we provided recommendations for a better chain of evidence that would help investigators determine if there's been a violation with the trip tickets and notification. But we did not hear from those charged with enforcing the laws if they felt that would be, these agencies find them to be effective tools in establishing that evidence and chain of custody in the theft and subsequent sale of another person's personal property. Many of my experiences involve landowners who hit a dead end without access to the records of what timber was harvested from their property when they found out what mill it had gone to, and they were unable to obtain information that would be standard operating procedure if we did put some of these recommendations in place. Mr. Caribou was one of the first landowners who had uncovered a trove of information about the violations he personally looked into. And it was shocking to me to find out where see his evidence and that there were local businesses that were buying that wood. And I think that it's we've got to have a better system in place. The Attorney General's office recommended a 2-year period of improved tracking for reports of timber trespass. But it does not say which agency or entity will take the lead on compiling data. I would like to know, has a central database or template for reporting these complaints been established, and will it be made available to the stakeholders? Does a county forester or a state police officer, of examples of the boots on the ground civil servants interfacing with the public, do they know who to pass information along to if they receive a timber theft complaint to ensure it is recorded? Do they know what information to collect and submit that is currently missing that's in this recommendation to pause and gather info for 2 years? And will members of the public and the forest economy be able to submit reports of timber trespass to this collection? I concur with what Dana has presented on behalf of the PLC. Again, appreciate the work and professionalism of the AGO and the other stakeholders. But we feel that further work needs to be done in the near term, beginning with establishing clear roles, responsibilities, and next steps, so that the work of all the parties on this issue does not fade away without action being taken. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be glad to answer questions and participate in the discussion.
Sam, I'm remembering that when we had a bit of this conversation last year, specific to trip tickets, and Dana, you can also weigh in, that the point was raised that we have, with fewer operating mills in Vermont, timber is often being taken across state lines or even in Canada, across the national boundary, and that a system of trip tickets might not be effective in that case. So I don't know if that's a logical argument or not. I remember it coming up while we have you here, and I don't want to be prejudging any suggestions, but if we've got a minute or two and you have any thoughts on that, get a jump start on the conversation might be helpful.
Sam, you want to take that first?
Sure.
And I'll add to it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I think that wood from our logging operations depends job by job, month by month, market by market. We may very well be shipping a lot of wood to New Hampshire or Canada, or quite frequently it stays in Vermont. But all that said, every load of wood that we send out, whether it's New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Quebec, it leaves with a trip ticket, and that trip ticket is noted as a tracking number when I receive a settlement for that load of product. Never once has a mill refused to honor my request and the standard that many loggers follow of using trip tickets to track the timber. And so it may be a scenario in which someone might dismiss the effectiveness of it because all the person has to do is just go take the wood to Canada and it won't be tracked. Well, that if wood is crossing the international border, there's all kinds of bill of lading, there's all kinds of paperwork associated with that and ways to track that. And I think if it becomes standard operating procedure that trip tickets follow every load off the job, that and again, as a suggestion that the landowner and the logging contractor identify the mills where the wood is going, the markets where it's going to go to, whether it's a log yard or a mill or a paper mill or a biomass plant, that the landowner has that. They understand that it's disclosed to them where the product is going. So if something goes awry, that they have a first phone call to make to ask for the weight slips or the scale slips for where the wood went. So there's a in any logging operation, there is a regular amount of paperwork being exchanged back and forth between the logging contractor, the trucker, the purchaser of the product, and the landowner. And I think that any professional logging contractor would not say that it's burdensome to have some standardization to what we are doing. And I don't mean to disparage anybody who doesn't necessarily, if they're not doing it and they don't like it, there's no disparagement meant to them, but it's a simple way to track what's happening and to create a chain of evidence. I think it's so we rely on it absolutely just purely for tracking and daily production notes, much less any issues of what's left the job.
I'll just add to it quickly, just in the interest of time. So commodities, apples. You deliver a food product somewhere, corn, apples, fruit. Okay, I guarantee that's being tracked because of food safety and regulation of food safety. The U.S. Forest Service puts quarantines on where wood products can move because of whatever it might be. It might be emerald ash borer, it might be pine weevil, it might be X, Y, and Z. Well, that wood cannot cross certain borders as a result of that. How do you keep track of it? There are limitations all around us for all kinds of commodities, regardless of what it is. Where does fuel oil come from? So does a shipload of Irving oil come from New Brunswick, land in Boston, gets shipped to Vermont, and there's no ticket that goes along with that as to where that originated from? I can't even fathom that process happens. So why are we so opposed to it?
I think if I could add, I would just say that, I mean, how many of us are looking at our electronic devices every day, tracking a delivery that we expect from Amazon or wherever, FedEx, UPS, US Mail, tracking numbers? Like, if our products were, what would we do without it in many other aspects of our lives?
But thank you both for those responses. Any other questions or thoughts from the committee? So I'll say, just in case people are thinking, where does this conversation fit into the work of the committee? There's no bill on the wall that addresses this, and so like anything else, if there's an interest among the committee in working on something legislatively, we can do that in the committee. We have a couple of different ways forward. So
I certainly feel that it's incomplete work. And if the committee's interested, certainly like to be involved in that.
I think the next step might be to see what other stakeholders who participated in over the course of the fall in in getting the study ready. If others would like to come in and share their thoughts as well, that might be next step. And in the meantime, committee members can be thinking about what, what might go into a committee bill. It can happen at the same time. Representative Burt.
The professor that you reached out to, Niles from UPM.
Yes.
Doing PFAS research with their students.
Yeah.
Could they also do what other states are doing, like Connecticut and on this subject?
Yes. Well, perhaps not her students, just because they're food studies.
Oh, okay.
But there may be other.
I know maybe, I don't know if they work with other, I know that he does. I gotta look up his name. He gave me his contact, but gentleman that comes to my apple orchard, that's what he does. He's from UVM and
Okay.
has students that do research of all types.
Okay, yeah, we could.
I can reach out.
Representative O'Brien.
I just wondered what this 2-year pause you referenced, Dana, was.
A good question. It was actually written into the report. It was the recommendation of the AGO that essentially we take 2 years and sit back and put it in first gear and just watch what happens with H614 and then take it up again in 2 years.
I think it was an acknowledgement that the wheels of justice turn at a 2-year pace rather than a
Well,
3-month basis.
I think it specifically referred to two indictments or charges within the last year that have yet to be adjudicated. To see what the impact of that effort was, and I think to try to paraphrase the Assistant Attorney General testified that in one of the recent cases that they just brought, the alleged villain or a defendant seems to be guilty of a whole lot of other criminal activities, and they will likely focus on the activity that has the best chance of being prosecuted successfully. And that's as far as I'll quote. So what does that do to help remediate the challenge that we set out to do at the urging of Representative Mahali over a year ago? I don't know. I'm not confident that the 2 years will be well spent.
Sam, did you have anything else?
Yes, Chairman Durfee. I think to this point in this discussion that we know a lot now. We have had a lot of informed testimony that was not particularly based on speculation or wondering what might happen. And I think we know enough now to draft something and move ahead that would be action oriented and leave those of us in the industry that are on our side of the industry that are feeling this the lack of prosecution of this is a bit of an attack on us. I may not be articulating that quite right, but it's hurting us. And we know we found out that there's more prosecutions going on than we thought, but it's still an average of about 1 or 2 a year. And we found anecdotally that there are even more instances of it going on. And without either of those steps to use that 2 years as this really aggressive data compilation and public awareness campaign with a budget and tasking people and agencies with that, I think in 2 years that unless a champion like Mr. Caraview or our organization or someone else that wants this to happen, it's not going to happen. And I think just right now we should strike while the iron's hot is my recommendation, my request that we draft something and pull something together now.
Right. Well, thank you both for your input, for your testimony, and we'll have a chance at the committee to talk about next steps. We're going to take, let's just take 5 minutes.